Hello, I'm Dr. Haida Pechand, a business professor at Houston Baptist University. In this video, I will demonstrate how to calculate various similarities between clusters. As in my previous videos, we learned how we can calculate similarities between two observations. Now we will learn how to calculate similarities between clusters. So there are several ways of calculating similarities, and we'll discuss these 5 of them. Single linkage, complete linkage, group average linkage, median linkage, and centroid linkage. So single linkage, this is the way single linkage is calculated. You have 2 clusters, then you calculate the distances between all possible pairs between those 2 clusters, and you select the smallest. In complete linkage, again, you calculate similar distances between all possible pairs among those 2 clusters, and then you calculate the largest. In group average linkage, it's the average of all distances between all possible pairs between 2 clusters. Median average or median linkage method is median as of all similarities. And finally, centroid linkage. The way this works, this is different from previous ones. First, we calculate centroids of each cluster. So centroids will be calculated, for each cluster, centroid will be calculated as, coordinates or coordinates of centroids will be average of all corresponding coordinates of all observations within that cluster. I will demonstrate this in just in a second in Excel, but the whole idea is just centroid is kind of a center of the entire cluster, kind of an artificial dummy observation, and each variable in that value of each variable of that observation is average of all values of the same variable within the all observation in that particular cluster. So visually, I have here, you can see this is the single linkage when we are calculating the smallest distance between possible pairs. Complete linkage when it's maximum. Average linkage is when you calculate all possible distances, then you will calculate average of all those distances. The median will be median of all those numbers. And this is centroid linkage. See visually how it looks like. This is my one cluster, another cluster. We calculate centroid of this cluster, and then we calculate centroid of the other cluster, and then we calculate distance between these 2 centroids. How we calculate centroids, for example, this cluster. So the first, the value of the first variable in this centroid will be average of all first values. The value of the second variable will be average of all second values of these 3 observations, and so on. Let me switch to Excel and demonstrate how this can be calculated. Here I have created this example. I have 4 observations, and I divided them into 2 clusters. This cluster, I named it C1. It consists of observations 1 and 4. Cluster C2 consists of observations 2 and 3. I color-coded here those observations. And these observations, each of them has only 2 variables, X and Y, in this particular example. And I color-coded, so this is observation 1 and 4 are in one cluster, 2 and 3 is in another cluster. Now we want to calculate all these different measures of similarities between these 2 clusters. Single linkage, complete linkage, group average linkage, median linkage, and centroid linkage. For the first 4, obviously we will need to calculate distances between all possible pairs, which means between 1 and 3, 1 and 2, 4 and 3, 4 and 2. And that's what I will do in here. So this will be distances between, here I will calculate this distances between observation 1 and 2, between 2 and 4, 2 and 4, 3 and 1, which is the same as between 1 and 3, 3 and 4. So let's first calculate distances. Here we'll calculate, since these are numerical numbers, we will calculate Euclidean distance. So here I want to calculate distance between observation 2 and 1. And this is my observation, between these two observations. So it will be, remember that formula, square root SQRT. Now 1 and 2, which means this minus this value squared plus this difference squared. And so this is distance between these two observations, 1 and 2. Now I will do 3 more calculations. Here I will calculate between 2 and 4, between this observation and this observation. So again, the same formula, SQRT between 2 and 4. So it will be this minus corresponding value for 4 squared plus this one minus this squared. 2 more. Here we'll compare with observation 1 and 3. 1 and 3. So it will be SQRT this minus this one squared plus and finally distance between observations 3 and 4. 3 and 4 between these two, or graphically between these two, between 4 and 3. It will be equals SQRT is minus is squared plus squared. So what we did, we calculated all possible distances between observation 1 and 3, 1 and 2, 4 and 3, and 4 and 2, for those 4 distances. Now we are ready to calculate the first 4 measure of similarities between clusters C1 and C2. Single linkage will be just smallest of these 4 numbers. Complete linkage will be the largest. Group average linkage will be the average of those 4 numbers, and the median linkage will be the median of those 4 numbers. So that's what we will calculate here. So the first AB, so the single linkage, which will be just minimum. Excel has a function called min of these 4 numbers. As simple as that. Next is complete linkage equals, which should be max, the largest. So those 4 observations. C, group average, which means we have to calculate the average of those 4 distances. And finally, median will be the median of those 4 distances. So we are done with the first 4. The next is calculate the centroid linkage. But in order to calculate centroid, we have to calculate centroid linkage. First, we have to calculate centroid of this cluster and centroid of this cluster. So how we'll calculate? This is where I create. So centroid for cluster 1. So the cluster 1 consists of observation 1 and 4. Therefore, the x value for cluster 1 for centroid will be average of these 2 numbers, 2 x's of these 2. Y value will be average of these 2 y's for those 2 observations. So it will be average of these 2, 1 and 4, and y, I can copy this across and it will be, now for y value, it will be, y value of the centroid is the average of y values of all observations in that centroid, and in that observation, in that cluster. And we have only 2, 1 and 4. So that's why it's average of these 2. Exactly the same way we will calculate centroid for cluster 2. Cluster 2 consists of observations 2 and 3. These are mine. Therefore, the x value for centroid will be average of these two. Y value of centroid will be average of these two. That's what I will calculate here. Average of these two. This will be x value for the centroid, and I will copy across. And y value for the centroid will be average of these two. Now we have coordinates of two centroids. According to the definition, centroid linkage is the distance between two centroids. So here I have to calculate Euclidean distance between these two centroids. So it will be, again, the same formula, SQRT, this one minus this squared plus minus this squared. So this is the measure of similarity if we calculate using centroid linkage method. To summarize, we learned 5 methods of how we can compare or measure similarities between observations. Single linkage, when we calculate the smallest distance between two observations. Complete linkage, when we calculate the largest distance. Group average linkage is the average of all possible distances. Median linkage is the median of those distances. And finally, centroid linkage is, first we calculate centroid of each cluster, and then we calculate distance between those centroids. And that's what we did last. So this concludes my short video. Bye-bye.